With Jamie McLennan, Frankie Corrado, and Darren Drager. Here we go, boys. Just hours away from one of the most highly anticipated games, frankly, in hockey history. The Oilers win, and it's immortality. The Panthers still have one more shot at winning their first ever Stanley Cup. We have no idea what's going to happen, but is the only guarantee that legends and legacies will be made?
It has to come with the territory for Connor McDavid. We don't talk about the best players who have ever played this game and them not winning a Stanley Cup. So here's Connor McDavid's chance. He had back-to-back 4-point games in this series, and it feels like at some point he's going to win a Stanley Cup. He's not going to be in those names of players that were really good that never won. And then when it comes to Florida, Alex Barkov, we always talk about him as maybe this underrated, underappreciated player. And every year the NHLPA Players Poll comes out and people lose their minds because the players say he's underrated. Well, if he wins a Stanley Cup, maybe we're talking about him in that top to 5, 7, names of players in the NHL. So there's a lot of legacies on the line tonight.
Well, usually when we all talk about star power and what they're going to deliver in a Game 7, I slide the other way and go, it might be an unsung hero that scores a game-winning goal. And if you look at the Florida Panthers, maybe it's a Stenlund or a Ryan Lomberg that gets an OT goal. Or for the Edmonton Oilers, Derek Ryan, a guy who chips in. I don't want to say Connor Brown because his legacy, he's really played well in the playoffs, so he's not unsung anymore. Even a Corey Perry, that would be an unbelievable name just given the fact that he's been in the finals so many times. But I'm going to slide more on the unsung hero situation because we always see somebody come through in a big Game 7.
Home ice used to be a big deal in Game 7s, but the visiting team has now won the last 3. In fact, the last visiting team to lose a Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final were the Oilers in 2006. And yet it feels like no visiting team has been favored in a Game 7 like these Oilers because of what's happened over the last 3 games. How has it tilted so much?
Yeah, I mean, they've managed to iron out the wrinkles, right? I mean, both clubs, the Florida Panthers, the Edmonton Oilers, have faced their share of adversity to this point of the postseason. I would argue that the Oilers have faced more of that than the Florida Panthers, but every challenge has been met. Early in the series, it was the Oilers' inability to put the puck in the net, to beat Sergei Bobrovsky. By the end of Game 3, they were able to do that, right? We talked about the defensive challenges. I mean, Cody Ceci and Darnell Nurse were a nightmare in the first few games of this series. Well, that has settled down because the structure of the Oilers overall has settled down. Stu Skinner has developed into a top story here. So everything that Chris Knoblauch has done has been measured but has been effective, but the players have earned this turnaround.
Yeah, it just feels like everything's leaning Oilers, but anything can happen in a Game 7. And is there something to be said for the fact that, remember Florida in Game 4, they fly in all the families and the cup's in the building and they had those nerves and they lay an egg and lose 8-1. The Oilers, it's easy to say when you're down 3-0, 3-1 that you're just playing free. But now you're not. Now your families are here. This is your first chance to win a cup. Could that be a factor?
For sure, and now that's the challenge for the Oilers. You are playing free. Now you're just trying to work your way back into the series, and maybe for them it goes from, let's just make this thing respectable. Let's chip away at it. Let's make sure that we make this a series, right, to now you're walking the same tightrope that the Florida Panthers are, where it's do or die. You had to fly everyone in. There's, I don't want to call them distractions, but there's a lot that goes on around the game that isn't exactly the game. So now that same challenge the Panthers had, the Edmonton Oilers will have.
I guarantee you there's distractions because there's a lot of floaters that have come out of the woodwork that are grinding these guys for tickets and all of that. A cousin and an uncle you haven't talked to in a year if all of a sudden wants to show up for Game 7. Believe me, there's distractions on both sides.
You look for X factors, and it's silly to call goaltending an X factor because it's usually the number one factor in a game like this. But if you are one who believes that the Oilers have one hand on the cup and that McDavid and Draisaitl will be unstoppable in a situation like this, isn't Bobrovsky the one guy who could stop it, who could stand on his head no matter how good the Oilers were and do something like he did in Game 1?
Yeah, just roll back the tape for Game 1 because the Edmonton Oilers had 18 high-danger chances that night. They couldn't beat Bobrovsky. He was brilliant. He was outstanding making saves, but he also got a little puck luck. If you remember, Zach Hyman put it over the net. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the power play put it over the net. So Bobrovsky hasn't been at the top of his game his last 3, but that doesn't mean in a one-game take-all scenario that Bobrovsky couldn't stand on his head and absolutely steal a game in Game 7. And you slide over to a guy like Stuart Skinner. You know, Stuart Skinner has been fantastic his last 3 games. He's got a little puck luck as well. So, you know, it is a little bit scary because it does come down to goaltending. I had a manager say this shouldn't be called the National Hockey League. It just should be called goalie because if whoever is a better goalie on this particular night is going to win the Stanley Cup. And Skinner's done a fantastic job. But again, it's going to be one save that is going to be critical that delivers you the cup.
We watched this Panthers team all year. They were so consistent, so good, and same way through the first 3 rounds of the playoffs. And it would be hard to believe that they not show up sort of for the 4th straight game. Why have they not been able to, or just haven't made adjustments?
They haven't made the adjustments that they've had to. And Edmonton, very fast team. Yep. Now Edmonton has basically said, we're going to put you in a foot race any opportunity that we get. And the Panthers haven't made those adjustments. The other thing is the players that we normally think of as being really strong defensively for them, whether it's Sam Bennett, whether it's Reinhart, whether it's Ekblad and Forsling, all these guys, they're making the mistakes. And they haven't been able to stop making mistakes for the last 3 games. So now you have one opportunity to really button it up. But they haven't been able to do that the last 3 games, and they haven't been able to play with a lead that entire time.
Massive stage for the Oilers, massive stage for the Panthers, and for the game of hockey. This, again, may be one of the most watched NHL games we've seen in an awful long time. Is there fears that we might end up with a VAR situation at a critical time?
No doubt about that. Look, I've been to too many general managers meetings over the years to count, but this is, when they talk about tweaking rule changes or adding additional video review, this is why. A Game 7 for the Stanley Cup, the stage, that's what it's all about. So undoubtedly everything will be under the microscope from a hockey operations perspective of the National Hockey League. So, the fear would be the goalie interference. What about a high stick? The puck over glass, all of those things. Every conversation that leads to a rule change is discussed based on the theater of Game 7.
Yeah, we don't need Brett Hull type situation here in this game. Somebody asked me last night at the Elbow Room, where everybody was for whatever reason, is this the greatest Stanley Cup final ever? And I think you have to make a distinction. Greatest, there have been a lot of lopsided games. There hasn't been a lot of drama. There's been no overtime. So I wouldn't say that. But it's been intriguing. And again, it has a chance to certainly be the most historic Stanley Cup final of our lifetimes.